Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. I hope you're doing well. For today's video, I wanted to do something just a little bit different. Last week's Wednesday video was really personal, actually, a lot more than I was expecting it to be. And I thought I'd share the story about how, as some of my friends say, I peaked in life. Now the title that you're seeing is not clickbait. I really went to Japan. And it was also during the first stage of lockdown as well. Now I will try to keep the events in this video as close to the story as possible and try not to ramble on too much about things that are unnecessary. To start with, growing up, I was obsessed about a lot of things, and one of them was Japan. As a kid, it was the first country that I'd ever learned about that really wasn't the United States. I grew up in a small town in the mountains of Vermont where there were less than 1,000 people who lived there. Do you know what the extent of our world was? Just the next town over where we can get groceries. I'm gonna double back to her, but Miss Beecher, if you ever hear this, thank you so much for opening my mind and my eyes to the world outside of that little town that I grew up in. So I grew up loving my fandoms: anime, manga, Power Rangers, Super Sentai later, Star Trek, Star Wars, you name it, I was into it. I was really late to the Doctor Who party though. And in my collection of fandoms, there was also Japan. I freaking love this country. I loved to learn as much as I could of it. I learned how to speak a little bit of Japanese, and then the history and the culture were absolutely fascinating to me. It always seemed a trip to Japan would be something that'd be way out of my reach and would never be obtainable. I mean, you don't become a public servant to become rich. But then in August 2017, a video was recommended on my YouTube homepage. It was from this new guy I'd never heard of before called Chris Broad, who ran the channel Abroad in Japan. The video was called "How Expensive Is It to Travel to Japan?" I had watched this on some downtime at work, and it opened my eyes to say, hey, I can do this. This is obtainable. So when I got my tax return in 2019, I immediately booked my flight and then booked an Airbnb to stay in Otaku, Tokyo for almost 3.5 weeks. When did I book that trip for? March 2020. Who knew what the state of the world would be when I made those plans in April of 2019? Now in January 2020, they experienced their first lockdown in Tokyo. They were hit hard originally, but things were looking better very quickly, and by the early March, they were reopening again. At that point, things were starting to shut down and look really bad here, so I thought, hey, I'm going to be safer over there. When the crap hits the fan here, I'll be much safer off. So my stubbornness prevailed, and even when my first flight got canceled 48 hours before it was set to leave the United States, I didn't let that bother me. I just booked a different flight. Now the hell that I went through at JFK is probably worth its own story video on its own, so we're not going to get into it today. So let's just say for funsies, I arrived in the Burlington, Vermont airport around 3 a.m., made it to JFK around 9:30. We took off from JFK at 1:30 and landed at Haneda, Tokyo at 4:30 p.m. the following day. It had been about 24.5 hours from the time that I stepped into the Burlington airport to when I stepped off that plane and got into line at customs. I got maybe 4 hours of sleep on that flight. I was a mess, but I was still in good spirits. I remember trying to be cool and speaking in all Japanese to the customs agent. He was, of course, speaking in broken English. I was trying to be polite by using the language of my host country. I was their guest after all. And after that crap that Logan Paul pulled a few years before, our stock as American tourists there was at an all-time low. So it was my goal to be on my best behavior and put my best foot forward, no matter where I was, who I was interacting with. But since my brain had shut down about 12 hours before, my Japanese was utterly awful. My lisp was on full display and my stutter kept kicking in too. But after customs, I was able to get my pocket Wi-Fi, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a little device about the size of a deck of cards, and it takes the cellular signal and then turns it into Wi-Fi. I got my JR Rail Pass and then I got on a bus to go to my host. At this point, it was almost 7:30 at night and I was just so exhausted. All I wanted to do was sleep. My host was named Chico and she was extremely kind. She met me at the bus stop and then gave me a full tour of her home. I learned really quickly that I needed to duck when I walked through a doorway in her home. She was so apologetic the first time I walked into a door frame. I'm a 6'2" overweight American. She had said that she had never hosted anybody who was as tall as me before. At some point after I was able to get to sleep, I was awoken at some point in the middle of the night. I didn't check what time it was. The apartment where I stayed was on the first floor. It wasn't on a main street, but there was definitely some traffic there every now and then. Sometimes a few cars woke me up, but the biggest one that I still loved that I got to experience, there was a group of drunken salarymen. It was probably a group of 3 or 4. They came by at some point in the night. They were singing a song. I was too tired to process what they were saying, but they sounded happy. It made me feel really reassured and almost welcoming in a way. That next morning, I woke up definitely feeling jet-lagged and hungry. I ended up going to the 7-Eleven that was only a few blocks from the Airbnb where I stayed. I got an onigiri, a bottle of green tea, and a Dr. Jelly. Seriously, I wish I could have packed one of my suitcases just with Dr. Jellies. I made my way over to Akihabara. It's this neighborhood in Tokyo where if you have a passion of any kind, they will have something for you. The name Akihabara means electric town in Japanese. After World War II, these black markets appeared in Akihabara, giving it its name. These would be filled with brand new appliances and then also electronics, which the consumers were finally able to get after the war. These markets are still there, but in the 1980s, the neighborhood evolved to start including things like anime, manga, and video games. And now it's every otaku's dream. The place that I decided I needed to go to first was the at-home Maid Café. I had seen a few reviews of it on YouTube and had decided that if I didn't go to this restaurant, I really would have regretted it. Now, had I not seen Simon and Martina's review of this, I probably would have been acting like Simon the whole time. I'm socially awkward at my best, and it did take me a while to let loose and start to have some fun. The staff were incredibly kind and made me feel very welcome. For my meal there, I had gotten an ami rice, which is exactly what it sounds like, an omelet over rice, and your maid will draw a ketchup drawing of your choice on the omelet. She had asked me what ketchup drawing would I like. I asked Pikachu, and she drew a really good Pikachu out of memory onto the omelet. She even put the kanji for Pikachu on the 2 chicken nuggets. After that lunch, I walked all around Akihabara. I spent a good 2 hours in the gachapon store. I really wanted to find Super Potato, which is a retro game store that's very famous in Akihabara, but I couldn't find the entrance to it. By this point, jet lag was starting to catch up with me, and I needed to get some sleep. I decided to have an early dinner where I got a bowl of curry, which was incredible. I believe the restaurant was called Johto Curry, and you can find it on Google if you search Johto Curry Akihabara. So I got my tickets for the next day, went back to my Airbnb, got a few hours sleep, and ventured around my new neighborhood till about 11 or so. The next morning, I arrived in Tokyo Station roughly an hour before my train was set to leave. John Dobbs' live stream on his Only in Japan Go channel was a great resource to help me navigate through Tokyo Station. Now, you don't have to be a train geek in order to enjoy the Shinkansen when you're in Japan. I wish that they could have these in the United States and it would be a practical use for them. There is nothing cooler than going 250 miles an hour down the track and you feel like you're gliding on air. It was a 4-hour journey from Tokyo Station to Hiroshima Station. And during my free time, I ended up sending an email to my primary doctor to let him know that I had arrived and that I was safe and having a good time. It sent him some videos and some pictures that I had taken as well. I also got to see Mount Fuji on the train. It was incredible to see it in person. Almost immediately after stepping onto the platform, I had gotten a notification on my phone. I looked at my phone and it was an email from my doctor responding to me. He told me that I might want to reach out to the embassy as soon as I can. He had also included a press release, which I clicked on and read. It was from the State Department. While I was asleep the night before, the State Department had put out a return to country order for any U.S. citizens to return to the country as soon as possible. I read the press release quickly and then Googled the number for the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. I'm not sure if I got somebody who was at the Tokyo Embassy themselves or at a 24/7 call center somewhere in the United States. But the person I was connected to, I explained my situation to them, and they put it bluntly. You have 72 hours to get out, or you're going to be stuck there for 6 months or more. They're closing the border on Monday. After that phone call, I Googled Japan Airlines' customer service number. Being that I still had my U.S. number, I looked for their call center that was based in the U.S. and it wouldn't be open till 9 p.m. Japan time, so I decided to stay the night in Hiroshima and then call them at 9 o'clock from my hotel. It had been important for me to go to Hiroshima. It was part of my pilgrimage. I checked into my hotel, walked to an okonomiyaki restaurant, and then walked to the Hiroshima Peace Park. It was eerie to say the least to be there. The closest comparison that I can make is if Arlington National Cemetery was smack dab in the center of a modern city. The thing that was most important for me to see was the statue of Sadeko Sasaki, because it was her story that introduced me to Japan and the world outside of my little hometown. Now for the part that I wanted to double back to. The lesson that we were given that day in my 3rd grade class by Miss Beecher, she taught us about the events of Hiroshima by showing us an anime, which was the spirit of Sadeko, showing a girl in the modern day what had happened in 1945. It was her life that introduced me to Japan and then also, by extension, the outside world, to which I owed a great debt to, and I needed to stop there and pay my respects. To those who don't know this little girl story, I'll keep it brief. Sadeko was 2 years old when she had survived the bombing of Hiroshima. Her family lived just about a mile from ground zero. 10 years later, this little girl wanted to grow up and become a gym teacher, but she started to get sick and she ended up developing leukemia. She was hospitalized at the Red Cross Hospital in Hiroshima. About a week before her death, one of her friends came to visit her and told her about the legend that if she folds 1,000 paper cranes, then she will be granted one wish. Her wish was for her health and that she wanted to go home. Now, there are 2 differing tales as to if she completed the 1,000 paper cranes or not. The first account says that she had only folded 644 and that her classmates had folded the remaining 356 and buried them with her. The second account comes from her older brother, who claimed that not only did she fold the 1,000 necessary, but she folded 300 more. Over the course of the next 3 years, her classmates fundraised enough so that in 1958, they were able to unveil a statue to her in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. She then ended up becoming the face of the second wave of victims, when around this time, many children started developing cancer and passing away. So yes, it was very important for me to see this statue and to pay my respects to her. And as I said, it was very haunting to be standing there. I walked around the memorials for about 3 hours before I made my way back to the hotel as it was starting to get dark. I made my way to the hotel room and watched a sumo tournament while I was waiting for 9 o'clock. The representative that I spoke to was able to get me out on a flight Monday morning. So I had 1 full day left in Japan. I checked out of my hotel at 5 a.m. and made my way right to Hiroshima Station. I then got the first tickets that I could to get back to Tokyo with the Japan Rail Pass. The train would leave at 8 a.m. So I got some breakfast at 7-Eleven, then train watched on the platform for a few hours. I think I bought just about one of every drink from the vending machine because I wanted to try everything. I got back to Tokyo at noon and made a beeline right for my Airbnb. I just wanted to drop my clothes off and then become a tourist for the rest of the day. My host Chico had seen me walking, and I had tunnel vision going, so I didn't notice her at first. She and her husband asked why I was back so soon, that I was planning on not coming back to Tokyo until Monday morning. I remember my pent-up emotions had finally come out at this moment when I was talking with Chico. Tears burst from my eyes and went down my cheeks when I had to tell her that my government is calling us back and that they're closing the border, and if I don't leave soon, I might not get back. They understood and felt very sorry for me. I dropped my clothes off and then took a train to Shibuya. That's the part of Tokyo that is a lot like Times Square in New York City. There's this massive crosswalk that's, I believe, one of the biggest ones in the world. Then there's just endless entertainment, great restaurants, lots of things to do, lots of shopping that's all located in this neighborhood. On the way there, I ended up having an incident with 2 children. Now, the trains in Japan are basically libraries on wheels. Don't look at anybody, don't say anything, don't eat, don't drink. Just look at your phone or read a book and respect everybody's space. I had definitely broken this cardinal rule. Don't talk to anybody. When I got into this train car that was going to Shibuya, the car was empty. I picked a seat right by the door and sat down. I took my phone out and then was watching Google Maps. I was watching the list of stations that we were passing by and just waiting for the one that I needed to get off on. 3 stops later, there were only 3 seats left in the car. 1 across from me and 2 next to me. Family of 4 get on the train. A husband, his wife, I'd guess a 7-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. The wife sat down across from me, and then the man had told his children to sit next to the gentleman. I was not prepared for what I saw. Both of the children talked back to their father and said, to some extent, "No, I don't want to sit next to him." The little girl called me a Hakujin, or a white man. The little boy called me Gaijin, or a foreigner. They ended up bursting into tears as they were trying to tell their father no. He finally coerced them to sit next to me, and then he went to the next train car. Now, the little girl reminded me of my cousin's daughter, who was roughly the same age, and also they kind of resembled each other. I felt absolutely awful for them. and my Western brain started kicking in, which ended up being my downfall. I was thinking to myself, okay, maybe I can cheer them up. I can try to tell them a joke. I will try to do a coin trick or a card trick. I didn't even get past good afternoon. Both of the children screamed at the top of their lungs and then ran after their father. The mother stood up, and I also stood up. I bowed and, as sincerely as I could, told her in Japanese I didn't mean to upset them and that I was sorry. She gave a courteous smile and then followed the rest of her family into the next car. As I sat down, I noticed every pair of eyes were on me. And then until I left the train, many people had kept taking glances at me. So I did all the dumb stuff in Shibuya and decided that I wanted to see if I can get tickets to the robot restaurant in Shinjuku. When I got there, there was a sign that they were closed and that they wouldn't reopen for another 2 days from then. So I tried to do everything I could, including checking out a pachinko hall. I saw the Godzilla statue, which is above the studio that shot the original films. And then the last bit of trouble that I found myself in. It was about 8 o'clock and I was standing in front of a ramen shop. I was still in Shinjuku, and at this point I was debating within my head whether I was, one, hungry enough to eat, and two, if I was physically able to eat. Because when I get really stressed, I shut down and I just physically cannot eat. I really will start getting sick. Now, most of the restaurants there have glass fronts with plastic displays of the food that they offer. So I was having my internal debate when all of a sudden I heard from behind me someone say, "Hey buddy, you got any plans right now?" I turn around and immediately red flags are going off in my head. This was a Japanese man who approached me and said that they don't use our slang. So I sensed trouble and was just trying to wait for a break in the foot traffic in order to sneak in and get the hell away from this guy. I figured I'd play dumb tourist and just play along until I can get away. I motion with my hands to the restaurant and then say, I'm just wandering around. He says to me, "Well, you know you're in the red light district, right?" I said, "Yeah, I've heard." He then tried to solicit me to go into his massage parlor. We were standing in one of those streets that were closed off to traffic. The street was filled with people passing us. And he was just openly telling me the services that they offer and how much the services costs. I was able to get the break in foot traffic that I was looking for and sidestep right into it and immediately start walking away from this guy. But as I took that step, my big mouth got me in trouble again. In the most condescending voice I can muster, I asked him, "Uso desho," which is one of my favorite phrases in Japanese. It's not something that you say publicly, or at least to someone that you're not close friends with. Depending on the context, it either means you're lying or you're kidding, right? I was hoping that my tone and delivery would convey the second meaning in the most insulting way that I could muster at the time. As I was walking away, he then yelled at my back, "Well, you American!" I figured something was up with the guy, and I've heard from many other people who fell for these kind of scams. I didn't want to be one of those victims. I had also read one of the laws in Tokyo was that they can't come up to you and solicit adult activities like this. So I messed around for about another hour and a half or two, went to Don Quixote, which was quite an experience, and then also went to an arcade before making my way back to the Airbnb, where I then packed with a heavy heart. The next morning, I took one of the earliest possible buses to get to Haneda Airport. I'm used to the TSA in America, how you're supposed to arrive at least 4 hours before your international flight. I probably could have arrived at the airport 20 minutes before takeoff, and I would have gotten on the plane just fine. It was completely different over there. So I'd spent all the money that I put on my Suica card by buying Kit Kats at inflated prices at the airport because I had gotten one of the tourist Suica cards when I arrived. It's only good for 28 days, and then you can't return the card and get a balance back as cash. You have to use it. I sat at the travel lounge just outside of our gate, and it was mostly other Americans who were there. A few of us started talking amongst each other. I was stressed out of my mind, and everybody was hearing so much disinformation. We weren't sure what's going to happen to us. Some had been hearing that we were going to be put in a quarantine zone in JFK for 2 weeks before we were allowed to come back into the country. Others had heard we wouldn't be allowed back in at all, and that a lot of the major US cities had looked like a zombie apocalypse had started. We took off at 11:30, not knowing our fate. Just to clarify, I arrived on a Thursday at 4:30 p.m. local time. The following Monday morning at 11:30, I'm on a plane coming home. We were in the air for about 13 hours and landed in JFK at 10:30 local time. After we took off, the stewardesses had given us a plethora of paperwork that we all needed to fill out, that they were requiring us to fill out to get back into the country. basically wanting to know where we were, how long we were out of the country, where we're going to be quarantining, whatnot, yada, yada, yada. My fears were finally put aside when I got to the customs agent. He asked me for my passport and my paperwork. He never looked at my paperwork. He just looked at my passport, asked me where I was. I said Japan. He looked from the data page on my passport to then that one single visa stamp that I have in there from Japan, not 1 week before. He slid all my stuff back to me and yelled, "Next!" Once I got to my next terminal, I was able to pay $75 to get my ticket moved up. Otherwise, I would have had to sit in the airport for another 6 hours when I could have been home. That was $75 well spent. I had a seatmate for the first time this whole trip. It was this girl named Sophie. She had been teaching English in Taiwan for the last 3 years. Because of the uncertainty that was going on with the world at the time, her employers told her to go back to America and that they would bring her back whenever they could. For the short hour flight, we were swapping stories the whole time and having a blast. It was really nice. This was someone who had a very similar experience to what I was going through. At least I didn't lose my employment because of this. When we landed, we added each other on Instagram, and we did keep in touch for a little bit. But I didn't reach out to her about another way to keep in touch when I purged all my social media about a year later. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for listening to my stories. It's always fun to go back and relive that time in my life where I peaked. I've always wanted to share my experiences on the podcast, maybe, but just nothing ever worked out. I definitely want to go back, and every year something gets in the way that makes it so I can't go. But all that is for another time. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you next time.